Hello, horror lovers. I'm here to show you and tell you a few disturbing stories from Reddit. Subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share your thoughts in the comments. Get comfortable, and enjoy the video. I've kept this story to myself for many years, and only now feel ready to tell it. My brother and I lived next to an elementary school, where we often walked our dog on the sports field and through a small wooded area nearby. Sometimes we'd let the dog run free while we played on the playground or made up games in the woods. I think I was around 14 at the time. This happened about 10 years ago. The school grounds had a large field, a playground close to the building, and another playground farther away, deeper in the trees. We were swinging on the swings at that farther playground, which still had a clear view of the surrounding residential streets and a small parking lot that bordered the wooded area. While we were swinging, I noticed an SUV pull up along one of the roads and park in the lot. It was the weekend, so there were no other cars around and almost no people, just a woman walking her dog somewhere on the school grounds. The SUV was about 40 meters away. I wear glasses, and even with them I couldn't clearly see the people getting out, but I noticed some details about their clothing. There were 3 of them. 2 looked older, middle-aged, maybe around 50. I remember one of them wearing a wide-brimmed women's sun hat. The third person looked like a teenager or a young adult in his early 20s, wearing a green and white striped shirt and cleats. At the time, nothing about this seemed unusual. People often came to the school to use the field for practice or exercise. Looking back, though, it feels strange that they parked in the lot instead of along the road closer to the field, which was on the opposite side of the property. Still, I didn't think much of it. I assumed it was just a grandmother and grandfather with their grandson coming to practice, and I went back to playing with my brother. I remember watching the 3 of them walk behind the school building, heading in the opposite direction from where we were. After a while, maybe 15 or 20 minutes after the SUV arrived, we decided to stop swinging and walk our dog along the trails in the wooded corner of the school grounds. This part of the woods sat right at the edge of the property. In front of us was a tall chain-link fence, with a sidewalk and residential houses beyond it. To our right was another fence separating the school from the backyards of nearby homes. Tall trees grew along the school fence, giving the houses extra privacy, which also meant it was almost impossible to see what was happening back on the school grounds. My brother and I were at that age where playing didn't feel as natural or spontaneous anymore, like we were on the verge of outgrowing it. I was bored, but not ready to go home yet. I snapped a branch with red berries growing on school property and said to my brother, "Hey, want to play a game?" Which, for us, just meant, let's do something. I bent down to offer the berries to our dog as a way to start the game. They'd never harmed her before. I was still talking to my brother, who was walking a little ahead of me, when my sentence suddenly stopped. I noticed my dog's behavior had changed. She completely ignored the berries, and me. Instead, she slowly moved forward, tense and cautious, ears pinned back and nose stretched out, as if she were approaching something. I followed her movement, still looking down. When I finally looked up, I saw the same 3 people from the SUV, now standing barely 2 meters away from me. They were not an elderly couple with a child. They were 3 adult men. I remember the faces of the 2 older men who had been pretending to be a grandmother and grandfather. The one in front had short white hair and white stubble. His mouth was slightly open, rounded, as if he were quietly breathing, trying to move without making a sound. The second man was extremely thin, with sharp cheekbones and greasy brown hair hanging to his shoulders, framing a skeletal face. They had silently approached my brother and me from behind. Without saying a word, they turned their backs to us and began pretending to point at something in the woods, as if showing each other something interesting. The whole scene was so strange and quiet that I was instantly overwhelmed by one clear thought: we needed to get out of there immediately. I turned to my brother, grabbed our dog by the collar, and clipped the leash on. My brother was right next to me, but he seemed completely unaware that 3 suspicious men were standing just behind us in the woods. I kept telling him, again and again, that we needed to leave, but he was still caught up in the game I'd suggested moments earlier. Finally, he noticed the men. I didn't look back at them, not once. I only watched my brother. He went silent and started walking with me. Thankfully, the opening in the fence between the woods and the road was only a few meters ahead. We put distance between ourselves and those men, using the fences and terrain as barriers. To my frustration, my brother wanted to stop on the sidewalk to pick more berries before going through the fence. I panicked and begged him to keep moving. I never turned around. All of my attention was fixed on the safety of the open road, the sidewalk, and the houses ahead. We made it home without anything happening, at least, as far as I know. Were we followed on foot by those men? I still don't know. Did they go back to their car and follow us? Or did they simply give up? I didn't care. All I wanted was to get home, just a couple of blocks away. When we finally reached the house, I broke down. I told my mom everything that had happened, and I remember her reaction being strangely indifferent. I had always been an anxious kid, and over time she developed a habit of downplaying things, something like exposure therapy, whether she realized it or not. Her response didn't make me feel safe at all, so I went down to the basement and cried by myself. Years later, when I brought the story up again, my mom told me she actually had called the police that day, but nothing ever came of it. I'm incredibly grateful to our dog. I truly believe she saved my brother's life and mine. Since then, I've become extremely good at reading people. Body language, micro-expressions, tone, I can usually tell when someone is lying. I read emotions and intentions like an open book. Sometimes I can sense that something is wrong with a person from a distance. It's been both a blessing and a curse. So to the 3 strange men in the woods. I hope no one else ever had to experience your presence. And I hope you rot for what you tried to do. Let's never meet again. This next story happened while I was still living at my parents' house. At the time, I was commuting to college. At home were my 3 siblings, 1 brother and 2 sisters. For context, we lived on a 5-acre property in rural Ohio, surrounded on both sides by forest and farmland. On weekdays, my father usually left for work around 2 a.m., so I always felt a sense of responsibility to be the man of the house during those hours when something suspicious might happen. But this night was different. It was the weekend, and my father was home. I woke up to my brother calling my name, trying to get my attention. Our bedrooms were upstairs, and from the hallway you could look down over the railing and see the front door. It took me a few seconds to shake off the sleep and understand what was going on. I checked the time, around 1:30 a.m. My brother told me there were 2 men standing at our front door. That woke me up fast. We quietly stepped out of my room and leaned over the railing to look down. At first, no one was there. But I noticed my parents standing off to the side, out of view of the front door's glass. I whispered to my dad, and he told me that 2 men had been talking to each other and knocking on the door. Hearing that made my fear spike. I went back into my room, grabbed my gun, and carefully went downstairs, first making sure the men weren't visible at the door. If they had been, they would have seen me immediately, since the staircase faces the entrance. My brother stayed right behind me as we joined our parents, quietly trying to figure out what was happening. My parents had been woken by the sound of our dog barking and had come out to find the 2 men pounding on the door. A moment later, the men returned and started knocking again, despite the fact that no one answered and the dog was still barking aggressively. The timing, the isolation of our house, where neighboring homes were hundreds of meters apart, and the fact that they kept knocking anyway made the situation far more terrifying. After a couple of minutes, the men disappeared. We moved from the kitchen into the living room to look out the window toward our driveway, which was lit by an outdoor light. There was a black Cadillac parked there, but as far as we could tell, no one was inside. So the question was obvious: where did they go? Unfortunately, we got our answer when the handles on the rear French doors started moving. They were actively trying to break into the back of the house, right by the kitchen. I clearly remember my mother panicking and saying my father's name. There was real fear in her voice. Two things happened at once. First, adrenaline flooded my body as I readied the gun, horrified by the thought that I might actually have to shoot someone. Second, my father finally picked up the phone and calmly called the police, explaining what was happening. Thankfully, within about a minute, the rattling at the back door stopped. The men moved back toward the front door and started knocking there again. But by then, several minutes had passed, and suddenly we saw multiple police cars pull into our driveway and front yard, lights flashing. As soon as the officers arrived, the two men ran, trying to circle around the house. One vanished from sight, but the other was confronted by an officer who ordered him to get on the ground. He refused. He was immediately tossed and dropped. Several officers chased the second man, while one stayed behind to speak with my father and me. When we went outside, we learned that the second man had been found hiding in my sister's backyard playhouse. Both men were intoxicated, and the second was also carrying drugs. They were arrested that night, but we never learned exactly what charges they faced or what happened to them afterward. To put it lightly, the entire experience was deeply unsettling. So to the random men who came to our door in the middle of the night, let's never meet again. This last story is something I really want to share, to remind everyone to stay alert and clear-headed in any situation. For context, I lived in a remote area in Canada. It was an old town, with many abandoned buildings due to population decline. My friends and I were bored and desperate for something to do, so we started exploring those abandoned places. Before the experience I'm about to describe, nothing truly strange had ever happened to us. Occasionally we'd see small stains that looked like dried blood, and once we found a pentagram on the floor, left by someone who'd been there before us. But nothing genuinely terrifying. The last time I explored an abandoned building like this, I was younger. It was a daycare that had once been part of a psychiatric hospital. A strange combination, I know. It had been shut down due to a lack of patients and children. A few years ago, I decided to go back there with friends. I was 15 at the time. Most of my friends were the same age. When we arrived, the atmosphere was almost painfully cliché. Fog hung low in the air. It was dark. A light rain was falling. We reached the main gate, which was locked with a padlock. We helped each other climb over it, making a lot of noise, laughing and joking, completely unaware of what was waiting for us inside. We started exploring a small playground nearby, using the flashlights we brought with us. Even with our fairly powerful flashlights, visibility was limited. We decided to enter the crumbling building. Glass and dirt crunched beneath our feet as we stepped inside the part of the complex that had once been a daycare. Old Lego pieces still lay scattered across the floor, along with splintered furniture, torn dolls, and abandoned toys. The farther we went, the quieter we became, until the only sound left was the crunch of dirt under our shoes. In the corner of one room, I found a plastic container filled with pencils. I stepped closer to pick them up. And suddenly we heard a loud crash behind a metal door leading into the psychiatric wing of the building. My friends and I exchanged looks. There were 5 of us, and most of them were confident, even fearless. We shared a glance, and my friend Brian suggested we check where the noise had come from. I didn't like the idea at all, but in our group of friends, refusing something like that was nearly impossible. We gathered around the door and began pushing it open. It was rusted solid, almost fused to the floor, and it took a great deal of effort to force it aside. When we stepped through, the metallic smell and stale air intensified. There was another scent mixed in, one I couldn't identify at the time. We moved inside, sweeping our flashlights in different directions. Brian walked at the front of the group. The corridors were narrow, lined with metal doors on both sides, some of them partially open. I began to feel slightly claustrophobic, my breathing growing heavier. At one point, Brian shone his flashlight into a room and suddenly recoiled. We all stopped. Brian slowly stepped inside. "What is it?" I asked. "I thought someone was in here," he said, "but now, it looks fine." At the time, I assumed he was just trying to scare us, to build tension. Looking back now, I believe he was being completely honest. He stepped back out, and we continued deeper into the psychiatric wing. Then, suddenly, one of our friends asked us to stop. We froze and listened. From somewhere far ahead, we heard the sound of light footsteps, echoing down the corridor. We looked at each other. Fear was visible in every face. Brian suggested moving toward the sound. For a brief moment, we considered turning back without him, wondering if a spirit, or something else, was wandering the building. But we couldn't just leave him. The closer we got, the stronger the feeling became that we were being watched. When we finally entered a room on the right, we were hit by the smell of rotting meat. Lying directly in front of us was a dead deer. Its body had been torn apart, dark stains spreading across the concrete floor. One of my friends had a weak stomach and immediately ran out. That's when we heard whispering from somewhere deep within the room. Brian aimed his flashlight into the corner. A man stood there, his head lowered. He had short hair and wore a bright green t-shirt, stained, what looked like blood, and torn beige pants. He wasn't wearing socks, and his feet looked badly damaged. His body twitched as he muttered something under his breath. Even after we noticed him, we stood there in shock for a good 30 seconds before he made a clear movement. He slowly raised his eyes toward us and smiled, a smile so wrong it sent chills down our spines. "Have you come for the feast?" he asked. The tone and energy of his voice shifted from word to word. That was the final straw. We ran. We bolted out of the room, back toward the daycare section. The metal door was still open, and we tried to slam it shut, but the rust and sheer weight of it fought us. All 5 of us had to throw our weight into it before it finally closed. Just before it slammed shut, I caught one last glimpse of the man's silhouette. His unnaturally white teeth were the only thing clearly visible in the darkness. We collapsed against the metal door, gasping for air, checking with each other to make sure we had all seen the same thing. Our breathing was heavy, and a moment later, we heard a soft knock on the door. That's when we knew it was time to leave. We ran from the complex and didn't stop until we reached home. A year later, police conducted a routine search of the area and found the man. According to their report, he had once been a patient in that psychiatric wing before it was shut down. After being transferred to another facility, he escaped and survived by hunting wild animals around the complex. When he was arrested, they discovered he suffered from multiple illnesses caused by eating raw meat, and his mental condition had significantly deteriorated. Later, rumors spread that he may have killed someone in the woods while searching for food, but this was never confirmed. In the end, be careful, especially in dangerous places like abandoned buildings. And to that creepy guy, let's never music meet again. Between my town and a neighboring one, along a rural road that connects them, there's an abandoned house. I've been there before, twice, actually, with my sister and my best friend. According to bank records I managed to find, the house is several centuries old, and its design clearly reflects that. It's a 2-story building with a basement. Inside, there's a lot of furniture and scattered belongings. It's far from empty. It looks like no one has lived there for decades. It feels as though the former owners simply vanished one day, leaving everything behind. In the past, I entered through a cellar door leading into the basement. It was broken and propped open with large sticks. My first visits were about 2 years ago, and I hadn't been back since. One of my friends became interested after hearing about my experiences, and last summer I suggested we check it out together. I never thought of it as a dangerous place, just an interesting one to explore. We parked across the road, in the lot of a nearby industrial building. The road was rural but not deserted, and we didn't want anyone asking questions. My friend, braver than me despite my previous visits, crossed the road first and walked up to the house. He asked questions about what I had found inside. I told him there were expired food items still in the kitchen and a board game upstairs that I'd taken home once. As we walked from the front of the house toward the side yard leading to the cellar, I noticed something strange. The vegetation was much thicker than before. The last time I'd been there was in spring, with my sister and best friend, and I hadn't encountered anything like this dense overgrowth. I mentioned it to my friend as we struggled to find a path to the cellar. Eventually, we pushed through the branches and found the cellar entrance, broken and propped open, just as I remembered. We talked briefly about how unsettling it felt, and I found myself staring into the dark opening leading into the abandoned structure. I remembered how deeply that entrance had frightened me before. I also noticed that some of the sticks holding the door open didn't look familiar. Still, I didn't say anything, telling myself it was just anxiety. We discussed who would go first, and my friend joked that since I was the expert, it should be me. I hesitated. After about 5 minutes of deep breathing and trying to calm myself, I started down the cellar steps. The entrance was extremely awkward. Part of the cellar had collapsed, leaving very little room to move. I had to duck under the remaining part of the door, carefully lower my feet onto the steps, then turn sideways to squeeze through the narrow gap into the basement. Once I bent down, my nerves flared again, and I had to pause to collect myself. Still, I made it inside. My friend followed quickly, which actually reassured me. We both stood in a corner of the basement and began looking around. I turned on my phone's flashlight. He did the same. A thick spiderweb blocked the path to the stairs leading up to the first floor. I found some kind of tool nearby, swept it through the web, then dropped it onto the concrete floor. We spoke quietly. I don't remember about what. Then, for a moment, we fell silent. That's when we heard it. Footsteps above us, on the wooden floorboards. It sounded like someone was walking toward the basement stairs. That moment is burned into my memory. I looked at my friend. At first, he didn't seem to react. My anxiety spiked. Before I could say anything, he said quietly, "We need to leave." He turned and practically leapt up the stairs. I remember thinking how impossibly fast he moved. He turned back and reached out a hand to help me up. I was slower, but still climbed quickly. He pulled me through the opening. I fell onto my hands and knees outside the cellar, then scrambled to my feet. As I looked toward the thick brush, I turned back to see my friend crouched low, staring straight at the cellar entrance. I told him we needed to leave, and he looked away and asked me to go through the brush first. I almost ran through the undergrowth, cutting myself on something sharp, but we pushed through quickly and came out in front of the house. My friend kept insisting that I walk ahead of him. The entire time, he was watching behind us, until he suddenly shifted his flashlight and aimed it at a first-floor window of the house. I asked him what he was doing and whether he was okay. At first, he didn't answer, so I asked again if he had heard the footsteps before we ran out of the basement. He turned to me and said that he had heard them. That was exactly why he'd been watching the cellar, trying to see if someone was coming after us. He went on to explain that after pulling me out, he wanted to follow me immediately, but when he turned back, he saw bare feet standing at the bottom of the cellar stairs. Because of the partially collapsed structure, he could only see the legs and feet. That was the moment he told me to go first through the brush. He never saw anyone come up the stairs, and he never saw anyone leave the cellar before he followed me. At first, I didn't believe him. I thought he was just trying to scare me. But the seriousness in his voice, and the look on his face afterward, made it clear he wasn't joking or trying to break the tension. I asked him directly if he was lying. He snapped back and said no. He reminded me that I'd heard the footsteps too, and that I knew someone had been inside the house. We stood there in silence for a few seconds, then both agreed to cross the road back to our cars. We stayed there for a long time, watching the house, waiting to see if someone would come out. Nothing did. After talking a bit about how unsettling the whole thing had been, and after my friend once again swore he was telling the truth, we decided to end the night. It had started to rain. I believe him completely. He has always insisted that what he told me was real. I've never gone back since, and I prefer to think that whoever was in the house was just a homeless person looking for shelter. But when I remember how close that person was to me while I was climbing out of the cellar, I still get chills. Now comes a very interesting, and fairly long, story. It was shared by one of my subscribers, and it's absolutely worth your attention. Creepy, atmospheric, and memorable. Many thanks to the user Gertsago Cod. Make yourselves comfortable and enjoy. You can find him at impromptu flea markets. No one has ever seen where this man comes from, or where he disappears to. When the vendors begin packing up, a car with a trailer suddenly appears somewhere on the edge of the market. A nondescript man unloads his goods, thick black bags stuffed to the brim with VHS tapes. No one can really describe his appearance, but he's unmistakable because of the tattoo on the back of his right hand. 3 triangles. They seem to be arranged chaotically, without any clear pattern. It's best not to stare at them. He doesn't like that. From him, you can buy the best action movies and the newest blockbusters, in good quality and the best dubbing available. Adult content, too, whatever you're into. But what if you're looking for something special? Something you'd never find in an ordinary kiosk? You say, "I don't see anything I really feel like watching tonight." He'll reply, "Then look somewhere else. You won't find better tapes than mine." You must answer, "No offense, the merchandise is great. I just have a special request." Offer him a cigarette as a sign of goodwill. If the vendor doesn't take it and keeps drilling into you with a heavy, unblinking stare, say nothing. Turn around and go home. Don't look back until you're inside your apartment. But let's say you did everything right. He'll take the cigarette, light it, and say, "I've got something in the trailer. Want to see?" The phrase special request usually makes people think of something illegal or immoral. And yes, he has plenty of that. Believe me, child exploitation and cartel execution tapes are far from the worst things in his collection. But let's not dwell on that. You're not the kind of person who enjoys that sort of thing, right? Besides degenerates, the vendor also has clients who are true film connoisseurs. And, by the way, they pay far more than the sick freaks. He can get absolutely any film, no matter how obscure the art house title. It's only a matter of time. A week. Maybe a couple of months. Then you meet again, in the same place. There's a rumor about one cinephile who sold his brand new foreign car just to acquire a collection of blooper reels from the Star Wars set. The strange vendor has probably earned enough money to secure a comfortable life for his children and grandchildren. But who said money is his main interest? Wait until he finishes his cigarette and then say, "I'm a bit short on cash right now." That's when he'll name his price. I don't know what payment he'll demand from you. But you will be able to pay it. I mean that physically, you'll be capable of doing so. You can always refuse. There won't be any consequences. But if you agree to the deal, keep your word. Remember what I said about execution tapes? Let's not expand on that. So what does he offer in return? I don't know. Those who fulfill the bargain and receive their tape rarely talk about what they saw. Some curse the day they got involved. Others, after watching the tape, roam the city like obsessed hunters, desperately trying to find the vendor again. Not everyone gets a second meeting. Want to know, at least roughly, what kind of film you might get? There are a couple of stories. Believe them or not, it's up to you. The first one is almost amusing. Though for Kolya, the kid it happened to, it was anything but funny. Kolya found the vendor and did everything by the book. As payment, the vendor demanded a defective gospel. He told the boy that when he found the right book, he'd know it immediately. He also warned him not to engage in pointless vandalism. "I can desecrate things myself," the vendor said. "I need a defective one." Kolya was perfectly healthy, so over the next couple of weeks he visited half the churches in the city, but found no defective holy texts. He even harassed some alternative-looking people, mistaking them for Satanists. Naturally, they told him off with a barrage of insults and a solid smack for good measure. Kolya was ready to give up when one day he ran into Jehovah's Witnesses on the street. He didn't care what they were preaching, but the small table beside them immediately caught his attention. On it lay books. Cheap yellowish paper. No pictures on the covers. In the middle of the cover, printed in plain type, were the words "The Gospel of Luke." The preachers immediately surrounded Kolya, started talking to him, asking questions. He answered automatically with vague mumbling, while his eyes scanned the literature spread across the table. And at the very bottom of the stack, he noticed a book. On its cover it read, "The Gospel of Louis." He opened it, and the entire book was one massive printing error. Some pages were out of order. In places, the text was upside down. On several lines, the ink had smeared until it was unreadable. Kolya flipped through to the final page, where a black and white image of the Savior should have been. Instead, there was something blurred and grotesque, only vaguely resembling a human face. The boy's eyes lit up. He'd found it. The sect members tried to take the book away from him, but a woman nearby noticed and started shouting. "Why are you harassing a child? Leave him alone, or I'll call the police." Kolya grabbed his prize and ran. When he brought the book to the tape seller, the man took it and flipped through the pages. According to Kolya, the vendor smiled, a nasty, unsettling grin. The kind that makes your skin crawl. Still, he handed over the cassette. For several days, the new owner didn't dare watch what he'd received. But eventually, curiosity overcame his fear. To feel safer, he invited a few classmates over and put the tape into the VCR. At first, it was boring. The camera followed a man and a woman holding hands. They were walking through a park, chatting about something, completely ignoring the cameraman, or pretending to. The boys quickly lost interest and were about to turn the tape off, convinced Kolya had been scammed. But just as someone reached to stop the video, the couple entered a restaurant. The camera shifted, and their faces came into view. Everyone in the room gasped. The woman on the screen was Kolya's mother. The man beside her was someone none of them recognized. That same evening, Kolya's father learned everything. What happened next depends on who you ask. Some say that after the divorce, the boy was sent to live with a distant aunt in the countryside. Neither parent showed much interest in him afterward. His mother believed he had deliberately humiliated her. His father disowned him, because Kolya looked exactly like the man from the tape. There's another story. There was a man named Tom who went to the market with his friend Eric. Neither of them was completely sober. At some point, they got separated. When Tom found Eric again, he was already talking to the tape seller, and had been for quite a while. Tom stepped closer and overheard the conversation. "No, you handle that without me. If you really need something, this is what I've got." Eric showed a slightly deformed bullet. Here's some context: Eric had served in Afghanistan. That bullet had passed within a millimeter of his heart. It wasn't especially valuable to him. Eric wasn't sentimental, but he liked showing off the piece of ammunition that had once been pulled from his own body when drinking with friends. "Deal," said the vendor. He took the bullet from Tom's hand and handed over a cassette. "And if I don't like the movie, can I return it?" "Of course. But trust me, you'll love it." Tom lived close to the market and had a VCR, so the two of them went straight to his place to watch the tape. The video was a chronicle of a man's life, or rather, a pseudo-chronicle. The final segment was dated 2021. At the time, it was the mid-1990s. The first footage was from 1975. Judging by the setting and language, it appeared to have been filmed somewhere in the Middle East. The segment lasted a few minutes and showed a modest home and a baby sleeping peacefully in a cradle. Then came 1986. For about 15 seconds, the camera focused closely on a boy's face, clearly the same child, now grown. The shot widened, revealing that the boy was part of a small caravan, likely refugees, stopped by armed men. Their gear and appearance suggested they weren't regular soldiers, but militia, or bandits. The caravan leader, a gray-haired old man, spoke with them for several minutes. Eventually, an agreement was reached. Several $100 bills were handed over to the armed group's leader, who gave the signal to let them pass. The boy was in a camp. The Red Cross emblem appeared briefly. The young man, accompanied by a woman, likely his mother, and the same old caravan leader, stepped off an airplane. For the first time in the entire tape, he was smiling. The man, dressed as a university graduate, celebrating his diploma. The same man, now in a lab coat, working in a laboratory. The final segment was dated 2021. A news broadcast played. The caption read, "Basil Verduk receives the Nobel Prize for developing an innovative vaccine against WTCH." At that moment, Tom turned to Eric to suggest returning the tape while there was still time. But Eric was pale as chalk. He was sliding off the chair, breathing heavily. Tom immediately called an ambulance. When he returned, Eric was gasping. "I didn't want to, he just got caught in the crossfire. I didn't want to." His eyes were wide, his head jerking back and forth, completely disoriented. Eric died in the ambulance. Massive heart attack. Of course, not everyone meets such a grim end. Some people say that after encountering the vendor, their lives actually improved. Some kicked their addictions. Others started making serious money. A few even managed to form connections with powerful people. No one knows why. For some, a special tape becomes a blessing, and for others, a curse. Do you need it? That's for you to decide. That's all the stories for today. Write in the comments which ones you liked most. And if you want to be featured in a future video, share your own creepy experiences. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. That's it from me. Take care, and goodbye.